few concepts here. So one is the deployment. When you go ahead and create like a deployment in Amplitude Experiment, what it generates is a key. Every experiment that you create inside of Amplitude Experiment has to be associated with a deployment. Essentially, the key that is created when you create the deployment is what gets associated with the experiment. When you start using the Amplitude SDK, the first function that you will call is the initialize function. When you call the initialize function, you pass in the deployment key. So all the experiments that are associated with that deployment, you get the evaluation for the user for all of those keys that are associated with that deployment. Typically, if you think about it, maybe you have some experiments that are running on the web, some experiments that you're running on your app, for example, and they may be completely separate experiments. Then you're best off creating like a separate deployment for your web and a completely separate deployment for your app, for instance. Because when you're looking at the assignments or the allocation for users, then it's a completely different allocation on the web versus a completely different allocation on the app. Similarly, when you're thinking about deployments, there are two types of deployments as well. There's client deployments and there's server deployments. So you could run experiments client side or you could run experiments server side. Again, typically, if you think about like a client side experiment, it could be something like changing the button from say red to green, for example, some UI UX change. Whereas think of a server-side experiment as you have algorithm A versus algorithm B that you want to test, for example. Server-side experiments are typically like completely separate from your client-side experiments. Good practice to make sure that you use your client-side keys with your client-side experiments and your server-side keys with your server-side experiments.
Just a small clarification. Is there a different deployment key for client and server?
You will create it. So when you create a deployment, then you have the option to either select client or server.
If I missed it, give me like an example for server deployment where it could be useful.
Yeah, so if you have like a server-side experiment, for example, you have search on your app and you have two different algorithms that you want to test. There is no UI UX change because the search results are still going to be shown in the same way. But the logic that you use for one algorithm is completely different from the logic that you use for another algorithm, for example. And all of that is running on your server, right?
Okay.